Ever feel like you're kind of just like stumbling through life and the world is just like one big chaotic mess with no like instructions or anything?
Well, that feeling you're talking about, it's actually a key part of the literary movement we're diving into today, postmodernism.
Postmodernism, that's like it's the one where they kind of just throw all the normal rules out the window, right?
Yeah, it's like someone took the rule book of storytelling and said, "Okay, see ya later rules." They like ripped it up, chucked it in a blender, and hit the liquefy button.
And yet there's like this method to the madness. They're not just like being weird for the sake of being weird.
Right. It's not just about being confusing. It's about deliberately using that confusion to say something about the world.
So, like, instead of neat little stories with clear beginnings, middles, and ends,
Hmm.
we're talking about uh, unreliable narrators and like fragmented realities, and maybe even a little existential dread thrown in for good measure.
You got it. Postmodernism wants to show us a world where truth is subjective, where meaning is fluid and nothing is really certain. It makes us question everything, like even reality itself.
So instead of spoon feeding us answers, they're kind of just handing us a jumbled up box of puzzle pieces and being like, "Good luck with that." I can see why. I can see why that might feel kind of unsettling for some people.
I think a good way to look at it is like this. Life rarely gives us clear-cut answers, does it? Postmodernism just it reflects that. It leans into the ambiguity and the complexity. Like it forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths about our world.
Okay, so far so good. I'm definitely intrigued, but my brain needs a bit of grounding here. Can we
Mhm.
maybe talk about how this plays out in actual literature?
Absolutely. So let's take Kurt Vonnegut for example.
Oh yeah, good old Vonnegut.
In his book Slaughterhouse-Five, the main character Billy Pilgrim, he becomes unstuck in time. Like he's just bouncing around different moments in his life and they're all out of sequence.
Whoa, and that's supposed to show us like uh, how trauma can mess with your perception of time, right?
Exactly. That fractured narrative, it mirrors the trauma of war. It shows how intense experiences can just shatter our sense of reality. So it's not just about breaking the rules for the sake of it. It's about using those broken pieces to reflect a deeper truth.
Okay, so that's Vonnegut. Who else should we be reading if we want to get a taste of this postmodern vibe?
Well, we can't talk about postmodernism without mentioning a few key players. Let's start with Thomas Pynchon.
Ooh, Pynchon. Now he's a dense one, right?
Yeah. Imagine diving headfirst into a pool of conspiracy theories and historical enigmas and just like all with this really dark, kind of absurdist humor. That's Pynchon's world.
I always think of his book Gravity's Rainbow.
Yeah.
That one's like the ultimate postmodern puzzle box.
It really is. It's dense, it's challenging, but it's also brilliant. Pynchon throws everything in the kitchen sink at the reader. Secret societies, wartime paranoia, a quest for this mysterious V2 rocket, you name it.
I feel like I need to take notes just thinking about it. All right, who else should we add to our postmodern reading list?
Let's talk about John Barth. His thing was metafiction, which is a fancy way of saying he loved to remind you that you were reading a story.
Metafiction. That's the one where the characters like talk about being characters, right? It's like they know they're in a book.
Exactly. You'll have characters discussing their own fictional existence, or the author might just insert themselves into the story. It's like Barth is constantly pulling back the curtain and saying, hey, this is all made up.
I always think of that scene in a movie where a character looks right at the camera. It's like, bam,
Yeah.
illusion shattered.
That's a great analogy. And Barth does this masterfully in books like Lost in the Funhouse. He plays with the narrative structure, blurs the lines between reality and fiction. He really forces you to think about the nature of storytelling.
That's so cool. It's like he's using the story to deconstruct the idea of stories themselves.
Yeah. And that playfulness and self-awareness, that's really at the heart of postmodernism.
Now, we can't wrap up this postmodern party without talking about Vladimir Nabokov. He was the master of unreliable narrators, right?
You said it. Nabokov loved to play with perspective, and Lolita is the ultimate example. I mean, Humbert, the narrator, he's this charismatic monster who seduces and manipulates the reader.
He really does. You find yourself almost rooting for him, even though you know what he's doing is horrible.
And that's the brilliance of Nabokov. He forces us to confront the power of language and how easily we can be deceived, even by a deeply flawed voice.
Wow. So all these writers, Pynchon, Barth, Nabokov, they're all playing with storytelling in their own unique ways. But they're all kind of united by this underlying message. Don't trust easy answers and embrace the complexity of the world.
Right, they're all saying, The world is a messy, confusing place, but there's beauty in that mess.
And maybe even some meaning to be found, right?
Exactly. We live in an age of information overload. Like, we're constantly bombarded with conflicting narratives and fragmented realities, and I think postmodernism, in a way, predicted that.
So how does understanding postmodernism help us navigate this crazy world?
It gives us the tools to think critically, to question everything, to be skeptical of authority. These are all essential skills, especially now when information is constantly being manipulated.
It's like, instead of just absorbing everything we see and hear, we need to be more active. We need to question the source, the bias, the agenda behind the information.
You got it. Postmodernism teaches us to be discerning readers, not just of literature, but of the world itself.
So instead of feeling overwhelmed by all the chaos, we can actually find meaning in it. We can appreciate the beauty of complexity.
That's the goal. And maybe the most important lesson is that there isn't always one right answer.
I think that's a great point to end on. We've covered a lot of ground today, but if there's one thing I want our listeners to take away, it's this. If you're looking for easy answers, postmodernism is not the place to find them. But if you're willing to embrace the challenge, to question everything, and to find meaning in the ambiguity, then definitely check out these authors.
I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. It's a rewarding journey, even if it is a little bit mind-bending.
And hey, if you're feeling really adventurous, try starting with Pynchon's The Crying of Lot 49. It's a wild ride, and you'll never look at a mailbox the same way again.
You've been warned.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you then.